Usakasi Niyukuno. I'm back with another take. And what I'm going to talk about here is putting the Taino community in perspective. I'm going to break these down into categories. I'm going to discuss about each of them so that way we can be able to look at this more realistically and to be able to move forward. So I'm going to discuss about language, culture, art, medicine, leadership, and symposium as it relates to the tiny community. And hopefully it will help you guys to put things in a better light. So I'm going to start with language. When it comes to language in the Taino community, we have to keep in mind that when the arrival of Columbus marked a stop in Taino society. We know in the chronicles, Las Casas states that the Spanish knew the language imperfectly. They didn't master the language, and we know for a fact that they poorly recorded the Taino language. This is why people in the Taino community they'll gravitate towards taking from the Locono. You have some people that will take from the Kalinago, and you have us that study all of that and learn from the Garifuna to put a new island Arawak language together for Taino descendants. Now, when someone in the Taino community normally says that their grandmother or great grandfather speaks the Taino language, that is total BS because we know that there is no one in the Taino community that speaks the Taino language of yesterday. However, since the inception of the Taino movement, there have been people that have been making an effort to revive a new island Arawak language. And I say it that way because when we speak about the Taino language, as it was documented, it was poorly recorded. What the data that we have, lean towards it having a relationship with the Carinago and the Garifuna because they are both certain Caribbean languages, as was the Taino language of those ancestors who we are descended from. The next is about culture. Um, the first thing we got to keep in mind is that we live in a post contact world. So everything that reflects is, life after that, the result of Europeans and Africans as they arrive after post 1492, admixing with the natives in the Caribbean, giving rise to Cubans, Dominicans, and Puerto Ricans. For example, when we're talking about the former Spanish colonies in the Greater Antilles. When people talk about Taino culture and the Taino movement, it's usually from referencing from the chronicles because um, there's nobody that lives like a Taino pre 1492. There's nobody that lives isolated like the our relatives in South America, where we still have some isolated communities in the Amazonian forests in South America. We don't have anybody living like that anymore. We live in a modern society, and the Caribbean since um, post 1492, 500 plus years later, has changed greatly. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But when it comes to Taino life, the way we look at this is going through the chronicles and comparing the chronicles with other ethnographic sources to get um, insight in how those ancestors live. Because again, none of us live like that anymore. So when people talk about Taino culture in context, it's basically based upon what they have read. Nobody lives like that. However, we still have a lot of material culture that we inherited from those Taino ancestors that we are descended from. Like if you look at it, a lot of old pictures from the 1700s, 1800s to the early 1900s in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, in Cuba. There were still people that were still living in Borgio style houses. Many people in the islands still use hamacas. We get barbecue from the Tainos. Um, People on the island still use Buren style stoves. So, we have a lot of material culture that we inherit from our Taino ancestors, but as a full fledged Taino culture, we just don't have that anymore. We do look at sources, like I said before, to get insight of Taino life because we do want to have an even representation of all three: the native Taino, the European, and the African, which all of that is reflected in our culture. If you are a Boricua, a Quisqueyano, and a Cubano, dances. Dances in the Taino community, um, for the most part, are made up. Unless they take from dances from South Americaners, like our distant cousins, distant relatives, like the Locono. They have a snake dance. Um, but for the most part, we don't have to make up stuff. We have thriving culture that reflects us. We do have bomba, we do have palo, we do have salsa, merengue, bachata. All of those themes they emerged, they evolved on the islands as a result of the mixing. Even though um, those modern dances, they have African or European influences, but with what we learn from people like the Garifuna and the Locono, we can use those elements into modern practices that we already have and incorporate those things where we can honor those Taino ancestors in a more realistic way. Art. Um, there are a lot of great artists in the Taino community, great painters, um, great artists that work with jewelry, that create great works. They should definitely be supported. Um, there's some people that would scam with art, but we definitely don't want to support those kind of people. We want to support people that do good for the community, especially for those who do a great job and help people um, in Borinquen in regards to the post hurricane, especially with the earthquake and all that stuff. We want to support those people. Medicine, there's no body that practices medicine that is inherited from the pre-contact world. That just doesn't exist. There are people that do try to understand from South Americans who still practice those disciplines as they were recorded by the Spanish, you know, like with the Yanomamo, with the Yopo. There are people that do generally dedicate themselves to studying it, but as far as how the Tainos practice it when Columbus arrived, there are no more Behikes. Leadership, as far as um, the portrayal of caciques, it's mostly like a religious group, a figurehead of a religious group. You know, being in a post contact world, you know, a lot has changed. You know, um, a little more realistically, people in government positions would probably your modern caciques, but it's all a matter of perspective. Last but not least, Symposium. The symposium that took place last year at the Smithsonian was a great event that brought people together. The only one problem that I have with it is that it promotes Taino aboism, or rather strengthen it. And what is Taino aboism? Taino aboism, it's something that where a Taino descendant just believes that they are just Taino when we are not that. And it also creates and people like that in the Taino community don't realize that it creates a problem, just like in the Afrocentric community where they promote this fictional narrative where Africans in diaspora are Native Americans or were here before Columbus. So the problem of it is that it puts things out of context, and people that want to generally have a well grounded understanding of their ethnic identity, it creates a lot of confusions and distortions. And this is why we want to distance ourselves from that. Our goal is to approach the rise of Taino awareness within our ethnic identity, and we want to lay the distinction between the two, because we want to be well balanced. So, this is pretty much my take. In the next video, I want to talk about the flags because I think that's very important when it comes to Borinquen, Quisqueya, and Cuba. Because a lot of people in the Taino community they like to down those flags, um, not uh, educating that those flags emerge as symbols of independence. So we should never dumb down those flags because they're very important in representing who we are today. So this is my take. Observe this with an open mind. Celebrate your Tainoness in a balanced manner. Embrace all that represents your ethnicity. And until the next discussion, Wahiuba, we will conversate.